In the middle of a brutal winter storm on a road no one should stop on, a pickup truck slowed. Inside was a former Navy SEAL wrapped in silence and snow. When he opened his truck door, he saw a sight that stole his breath. A German shepherd mother, shielding 5 tiny puppies, their bodies shaking, their cries fading into the wind. He could have driven away. Most people would have. But one choice, one open door, would change every life there that night. If stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances move your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and stay with us. Duluth, Minnesota had a way of reminding people that winter was not a season, but a force. That night, the city sat hunched beneath a sky the color of old steel, Lake Superior invisible beyond walls of blowing snow. Wind tore down from the hills and through the pine-lined outskirts, turning roads into pale corridors where direction felt optional and survival did not. Streetlights faded into halos, swallowed almost as soon as they appeared, and the world narrowed to what lay directly in front of a vehicle's headlights. Ethan Cole drove alone through that narrowing world, his pickup pushing steadily along a forest road that locals avoided once the storms rolled in. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, built the way men were when their bodies had learned to endure before they learned to rest. Even seated, his posture carried the discipline of someone trained never to slouch, never to relax fully. A trimmed beard framed a sharp jaw, dark with streaks of ash gray that had no business being there at his age, and his eyes, when reflected faintly in the windshield, were the steady blue of a man who had once believed order could be imposed on chaos. He wore his Navy working uniform beneath a heavy outer layer, the digital camouflage continuous across jacket and pockets, no solid panels breaking the pattern. He hadn't changed out of it after leaving the base hours earlier. Some habits stayed because removing them felt like admitting something was over. The heater hummed, fighting a losing battle, while the wipers scraped at ice and snow, carving a brief, fragile tunnel through the storm. Ethan had no destination. That, more than the weather, was what made the night dangerous. The road curved near a stand of dense pines, their branches bent low and creaking under the weight of fresh snow. That was when he saw it. A dark shape near the shoulder, wrong against all that white. At first, he thought it was debris blown from the trees. Then it moved. Not much. Just enough to catch the eye of someone trained to notice what didn't belong. Ethan eased off the gas and braked. The truck slid slightly before stopping, tires crunching into powder. Wind rushed past the cab like something alive. He leaned forward, squinting through the glass, breath fogging the windshield. The shape resolved into fur, thick, matted with ice, and a body curled tight against the ground. A German shepherd. She lay low, her back to the wind, dark sable coat streaked with black along her spine and neck, the powerful line of her shoulders hunched in defense. Beneath her, barely visible, were 5 small forms pressed into her belly. Puppies, tiny. Their coats were the same dark sable pattern in miniature, legs and bellies pale tan, trembling so hard it looked like the snow itself was shaking. One of them didn't move at all. Ethan opened the truck door, and the cold struck him like a blow. Snow rushed in, clinging instantly to his beard and eyelashes. He stepped out, boots sinking deep, and the smell of frozen pine and raw earth filled his lungs. He crouched slowly, lowering himself to their level, careful not to loom. Years ago, he had learned how easily fear could turn into violence. "Easy," he said, voice rough but low, shaped by radios and wind and nights when calm meant survival. "Easy, girl." The mother lifted her head. Her ears stayed back, not flattened in aggression but tight with exhaustion. Her eyes were amber, bright and alert despite the ice crusting her fur. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She simply watched him with a focus that felt almost human, as if weighing the risk of trust against the certainty of death. Ethan extended his bare hand, palm open. The cold bit into his skin, but he didn't pull back. He could see the puppies now, 5 of them, ribs fluttering under thin fur, breath coming in faint, uneven pulls. One let out a weak sound, more breath than cry, and the mother shifted just enough to cover it again with her chest. "She's been out here too long," he murmured to himself. He shrugged out of his heavy outer coat and spread it on the snow, creating a barrier between them and the ground. Moving carefully, he reached in and lifted the first puppy. It was impossibly light, a bundle of bone and shaking warmth. He tucked it inside his uniform jacket, close to his chest, then reached for another, and another. He worked quickly but gently, hands steady despite the cold and the way his heart had begun to pound. The mother followed every movement with her eyes. Still, she did not attack. That told him everything he needed to know. When all 5 puppies were secured against his body, Ethan straightened and turned toward the truck. He opened the back door and arranged them on the seat, wrapping them in spare blankets he kept behind the cab. He adjusted the heater vents toward them, watching closely for any sign of distress. Then he turned back. The mother dog stood exactly where she had been, snow collecting along her back. She did not approach the truck. Her body was rigid now, legs locked as if rooted to the spot. The wind howled, carrying flakes sideways, and somewhere deep in the trees, a branch cracked under the storm's weight. "It's all right," Ethan said, crouching again, reaching out. "They're safe. Come on." For a moment it seemed she might. She took a half-step forward, nails scraping against ice. Her eyes flicked past him, toward the dark wall of forest lining the road. Her ears twitched. Then something changed. She startled violently, head snapping toward the trees. In a single fluid motion, she backed away, spun and bolted, dark form disappearing between the pines, leaving behind a case of paw prints quickly filling with snow. "Hey!" Ethan lunged after her, stopping at the edge of the road as the wind swallowed his voice. He stood there, chest heaving, staring into the white void where she had vanished. The forest offered. No answers, only movement, shadows, and the relentless sound of the storm. Then, faint but unmistakable, a distant boom rolled through the night, not thunder. Too sharp, too contained, it echoed once, then faded, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. Ethan turned slowly back toward the truck, 5 fragile lives breathing behind him, and the sudden chilling certainty that whatever had driven that mother into the storm was not finished yet. Ethan drove with both hands locked on the steering wheel, the pickup's engine humming steadily as the storm loosened its grip just enough to let him pass. Duluth's harbor lights emerged through the snow like tired stars, yellow and patient, reflecting off frozen pavement and steel railings. The city here felt older than downtown, warehouses crouched along the waterline, brick darkened by decades of wind off Lake Superior, the air sharp with iron, salt, and cold. Ethan pulled into the narrow drive beside the small rental house he'd taken months earlier, a squat one-story place with peeling paint and a porch that creaked even when no one stood on it. It wasn't home. It was shelter. That had been enough. Inside the cab, 5 tiny bodies shifted weakly beneath the blankets. Ethan cut the engine and sat still for a heartbeat, listening to their breathing. 5 separate rhythms, uneven and fragile, but present. He exhaled slowly, the kind of controlled breath he'd learned long time. I gotta keep panic from spreading. Then he moved. The house greeted him with silence and cold. He carried the puppies inside against his chest, the door slamming shut behind him with a hollow thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. The room was simple. One main space with a sagging couch, a scarred wooden table, a small kitchen off to the side, and a stone fireplace that hadn't been used in days. The smell was faintly of dust, old coffee, and motor oil. Ethan laid the puppies gently on a folded blanket near the hearth and went straight to work. He knelt, struck a match, and coaxed the fire back to life, feeding it split logs until flames caught and spread, orange light pushing back the gray. He stripped off his outer coat, then his gloves, and began drying the puppies with clean towels, rubbing gently, methodically, the way he'd once cleaned and checked equipment piece by piece. Their fur was dark sable, already showing beneath the frost, black overlay along their tiny backs, legs, and bellies pale tan. They were German shepherds through and through, even this small. One by one, he held them close to the warmth, feeling for movement, counting breaths. The weakest one, thin, too quiet, made his chest tighten. He pressed it closer, skin to skin beneath his uniform jacket, and whispered words he hadn't spoken out loud in years. "Stay with me." He filled the kettle using water from the jug he kept by the door, set it near the fire, and waited until it was warm enough to steam but not burn. He dipped a cloth and carefully touched it to each small mouth, just enough moisture to help. He didn't rush. Rushing broke things. When the puppies were finally settled, their trembling easing into shallow sleep, Ethan sat back on his heels. His hands shook now, the delayed reaction catching up with him. He looked down at them and made a decision that felt oddly ceremonial. Names mattered. Names made things real. "Buddy," he said quietly, touching the One closest to him, a little broader in the chest. Daisy. Another, smaller, with lighter paws. Charlie. The third stirred, letting out a faint squeak. Molly. And the last, the quiet one he'd worried about most, he named Max, a simple name, solid, like an anchor. 5 names, 5 lives, and still something was missing. The mother. The thought settled heavy in his chest. He stood, moved to the window, and pulled the curtain back an inch. Outside, the porch light cast a steady yellow circle onto the snow, bright enough to show every flake drifting down. For a moment, there was nothing. Then a shape crossed the edge of the light, large, low, familiar. She stood just beyond the glow, half in shadow, half in snowlight. The German Shepherd mother had returned. Up close, through the glass, Ethan could see her more clearly now. She was larger than she'd appeared on the road, power held in check by exhaustion. Her coat was thick, dark sable with a heavy black overlay along her back and neck, the kind of coloring that looked almost carved from shadow. Ice still clung to the fur around her chest and legs. One ear tipped slightly forward, the other bore a small notch, old and healed. Her amber eyes were fixed on the house, unblinking, alert. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She stood guard. Ethan's throat tightened. He moved slowly to the door, hand resting against the wood, and opened it just enough for the warmth to spill out. Cold rushed in immediately, sharp and biting. "They're here," he said softly. "They're alive." The mother shifted her weight, one paw stepping into the light, nails clicking faintly on ice. She took another step, cautious, drawn by the smell of her puppies and the heat rolling out from the doorway. Ethan crouched, keeping his body low, one hand extended, palm up. Then headlights swept across the snow. A vehicle rolled down the narrow harbor road, slow and deliberate. It was an older sedan, dark in color, its paint dulled by salt and winter, no visible plates on the rear. The beams cut across the yard, briefly illuminating Ethan, the open door, the warm interior, and the dog. The change in her was instant. The mother froze, muscles locking, ears flattening. She backed away from the light, eyes never leaving the car as it passed, then retreated quickly into the trees bordering the property, melting into shadow as if she'd never been there. The car didn't stop. It continued on, tires crunching softly, then disappeared around the bend. Ethan stood in the doorway long after the road was empty again, cold creeping up his legs, unease settling deep in his gut. He closed the door slowly and leaned his forehead against it, listening to the fire crackle behind him and the faint, precious sounds of 5 small breaths. He didn't know who was in that car. He didn't know why a mother dog would fear being seen. But he knew one thing with a clarity that cut through exhaustion and memory alike. This night was not finished with him yet. Morning came to Duluth wrapped in light that looked deceptively kind. Snow still fell, but thinner now, drifting like ash instead of knives, and Lake Superior lay beyond the harbor as a vast frozen mirror, pale blue and unforgiving beneath the sky. The wind had softened, yet the cold remained, a deep, patient cold that settled into bones and wood alike. Ethan had not slept. He sat at the small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cooling between his hands, listening to the fire's low murmur and the tiny, uneven breaths rising from the blanket by the hearth, where the 5 puppies lay curled together like fallen leaves, pressed into warmth. The mother dog had not returned to the porch during the night. He checked anyway, more than once, scanning the snow-lit yard for any sign of her dark shape, finding only fresh drifts and the faint echo of the car's headlights still lingering in his thoughts. The knock came mid-morning, gentle but firm, the kind of knock that belonged to someone who expected to be heard. Ethan stood, his joints stiff, and opened the door to find a woman bundled against the cold, a basket hooked over one arm. She was in her late 60s, perhaps early 70s, average height with a sturdy frame that suggested years of making do rather than asking for help. Her hair was white but thick, pulled back into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, wisps escaping beneath a knitted cap. Her skin was pale and weathered, fine lines gathered around sharp, observant eyes the color of slate. She wore a heavy wool coat the shade of faded plum and practical boots dusted with snow. "I'm Helen Carter," she said, voice warm but direct, the way widows often spoke after grief had sanded down the need for politeness. "I live 2 houses down. Thought I saw your light on all night." Ethan stepped aside, uncertain, then nodded. Ethan Cole. She entered without ceremony, bringing with her the clean scent of ginger and something medicinal. She set the basket on the table and glanced toward the hearth. When she saw the puppies, her breath caught, not dramatically, but in a quiet, involuntary way. She crossed the room and crouched, joints cracking softly, her movements careful, respectful. "Oh, you poor things," she murmured, fingers hovering before she dared to touch. "German shepherds. All 5 of them." Up close, her hands were thin and veined but steady, nails short, clean. She reached out and let one puppy sniff her knuckle. The little one stirred, coughed once, then settled again. Helen's mouth tightened. "They're too young to be out in that storm," she said. "Someone left them." Ethan told her what he'd seen, the road, the mother shielding them, the way she'd fled when the car passed. Helen listened without interrupting, eyes focused not on him but on the puppies, as if reading the story in their breathing. "This area's had trouble," she said finally, standing with a soft grunt. "Dog? Theft. People selling shepherds, sometimes breeding them with wolves, sometimes just using them for guarding scrapyards and illegal traps. And there are baits set out in the woods, wire snares meant for deer that catch anything unlucky enough to step wrong." She looked at Ethan now, really looked, taking in his posture, the uniform he hadn't changed out of. "That mother's not wild. You can see it in her eyes. She's been owned, and she's been hurt." Ethan felt something shift, a confirmation he hadn't known he needed. Helen moved back to the table and opened the basket. Inside were jars of honey, packets of tea, folded wool blankets, and a small metal box dented at the corners. She opened it with care. Inside lay bottles and blister packs, labels yellowed with age. "Old vet meds," she said. "From years ago. My boy used to bring strays home when he was younger. I kept everything. Never thought I'd need it again." Her voice didn't waver, but something old and heavy lived beneath it. Ethan nodded once, a quiet thanks he couldn't yet say out loud. As if summoned by thought alone, movement caught his eye at the window. There she was, the mother dog, standing just beyond the line of snow where the porch light faded. In daylight, she looked different, less like a shadow and more like a living thing held together by will. Her coat was thick but ragged in places, dark sable streaked with black along her spine and neck, legs and belly pale tan. One shoulder bore a faint scar, the fur growing back thinner there. She watched the house, alert, wary, but present. Ethan took a blanket and gently lifted one puppy, the lightest of the 5. He moved slowly to the door, opened it, and crouched, holding the little one out. The cold rushed in, sharp and immediate. The mother stepped forward, sniffed, then extended her tongue in a brief, careful lick across the puppy's face. The puppy squeaked softly, tail twitching. For a moment, something like relief crossed the mother's eyes. Then she lifted her head and looked past Ethan, past the house, toward the industrial stretch near the harbor, the warehouses, the stacked containers, the skeletal cranes standing idle against the ice. Her body stiffened, ears angling toward that direction as if she heard something no one else could. "She's watching something," Helen said quietly from behind him. Ethan followed the line of the dog's gaze and felt unease settle again. He brought the puppy back inside, closed the door, and the mother remained outside, pacing once before retreating to the edge of the trees. They had barely returned the puppy to the warmth when the coughing started. One cough, then another, sharper this time. The puppies stirred, then all 5 began to cough in uneven bursts, small chests hitching. One, Max, made a wet, rattling sound that froze Ethan where he stood. Helen was already moving. She knelt, checked gums, pressed gently at ribs. "They're chilled and stressed," she said. "Could be infection setting in. We need to keep them warm and watch their breathing." Ethan fed the fire, added another log. Outside, the light dimmed suddenly, the room dipping into shadow before the bulbs flickered back on. The hum of electricity wavered, then steadied. Helen looked up at the ceiling, then back at Ethan. "Storm's not done with us yet," she said. "If the power goes, it'll get dangerous fast." As if in answer, the lights flickered again, longer this time, leaving the room in the orange glow of the fire. One puppy coughed hard, breath whistling, and Ethan felt the night tighten around them once more. The power went out with a sound like a held breath finally giving up. One moment the ceiling light flickered, the next the house fell into a darker quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind scraping its nails along the walls. Ethan stood still for half a second, listening, cataloging what remained. Heat, the hearth, light, a flashlight on the counter, another in his jacket pocket. Time, uncertain. Helen did not panic. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had lived long enough to know that panic was a luxury. She set a battery-powered lantern on the table, its soft glow filling the room with a steady amber. "All right," she said, voice low and sure. "We work with what we have." Ethan wrapped another wool blanket around the puppies, one at a time, checking gums and bellies the way Helen had shown him. 5 small bodies pressed together, coughing less now, but still breathing too fast. The weakest, Max, shivered despite the warmth, a faint wheeze, riding each breath. Ethan kept his hands there longer than necessary, as if contact alone could anchor the rhythm. The door creaked softly, pushed open just enough to let the cold test the room again. The mother dog slipped inside without a sound. She positioned herself between the puppies and the open space, broad chest low, legs braced, head up. Her presence changed the room. The air felt guarded. Helen glanced at her and nodded once. "Good girl," she murmured, careful not to move too quickly. She pulled a small, zippered pouch from her coat and opened it on the table. Inside were blister packs of antibiotics, a digital thermometer with a cracked screen, and gauze wrapped tight with rubber bands. "Old supplies," she said. "Still good." Ethan followed her instructions precisely. Cool cloths, not ice. Warmth, not heat. Fluids in drops, not gulps. He worked as he once had under pressure, focused and quiet, the uniform on his body a reminder of procedures learned the hard way. Helen watched him with a faint, approving crease at the corner of her eyes. As the night deepened, the wind grew teeth, snow hissed against the windows. Ethan noticed the mother's shoulder when she shifted, an irregular patch where fur grew thinner, skin faintly ridged beneath. A scar, old, the kind left by wire or rope tightened too long. He met Helen's eyes. She saw it too. "She's been restrained," Helen said softly. "Not by kindness." Ethan looked down at the dog. "Mara," he said, testing the name aloud. It fit, simple and strong, like a line drawn through uncertainty. The dog's ears flicked at the sound. She didn't turn, but her tail thumped once against the floor. Hours passed without shape. The fire sank and was fed again. The flashlight batteries dimmed, then were replaced. Outside, the world narrowed to white and shadow. Inside, time stretched thin. At some point, Mara rose and padded to Ethan, catching the cuff of his sleeve gently between her teeth. Not a pull, a request. He followed her to the window. Moonlight spilled across the yard, the snow bright as bone. There, just beyond the porch, were fresh tire tracks. Dark grooves cut into the drift, too close, too deliberate. Ethan's jaw tightened. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching softly. Something lay half buried near the steps. He knelt and brushed snow away with bare fingers. A torn collar, leather cracked with age, metal tags scratched nearly smooth. One word remained, faint but legible under the moon. Evidence. He closed his hand around it, the cold biting deep, and felt the night lean in. Morning broke clean and sharp, the sky over Duluth polished to a brittle blue that made the snow look like cut glass. The harbor lay frozen and bright beyond the warehouses, cranes etched black against the light. Ethan had just finished refilling the fire when a vehicle rolled into the narrow drive. Tires crunched, engine idled, then cut. He watched from the window as a man stepped out, movements deliberate, practiced, as if the cold were an old acquaintance rather than an enemy. The man was in his early 40s, tall and solid without bulk, shoulders squared by years spent outdoors. His face was angular, weathered, with a short, neatly kept beard the color of wet sand, and eyes that missed very little. He wore a dark green jacket with the insignia of the state's wildlife service stitched over the chest, gloves tucked into his belt. When he walked, it was with the unhurried confidence of someone used to authority and the resistance that came with it. His name, when he introduced himself, was Daniel Daniels, plain enough to sound like a placeholder, common enough to be forgotten, which suited him fine. "Mr. Cole?" Daniels asked, removing his cap. His voice was steady, not unkind, but firm. "State Wildlife. We received a report." Ethan opened the door fully, letting the cold pour in. He stood straight, hands visible, the NWU beneath his jacket unmistakable. About what? About unregistered canines near a protected zone, Daniel said, eyes sliding briefly past Ethan's shoulder toward the warmth and movement inside. Specifically, a large shepherd believed to be a wolf hybrid. Ethan felt the word land like a weight. "They're dogs," he said. "I found them in a blizzard." Daniels nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. He stepped inside, careful to stamp the snow from his boots. The puppies stirred at the sound. At once, Mara rose. She placed herself squarely between Daniels and the hearth, body low and rigid, ears pinned back, eyes locked on him with a sharp, measuring intensity. It wasn't aggression. It was warning. Daniel stopped. Slowly, he lowered himself into a crouch, keeping his hands open at his sides. "Easy," he said, not to her exactly, but to the space between them. He knew animals. That much was clear. Ethan explained, everything he could without turning it into a plea. The road, the storm, the mother shielding 5 puppies, the car with no plates, the collar with the word evidence scratched into its tag. Helen stood near the table, arms folded, her presence quiet but resolute, eyes never leaving Daniels. Daniels listened, taking notes in a small weathered pad. When Ethan finished, Daniels looked at the dogs again, longer this time. "You don't have paperwork," he said. "No microchip scans, no vet records, no proof of ownership." "I didn't have time," Ethan replied. "They were freezing." "I believe you," Daniel said, surprising him. "But belief isn't the same as compliance." Mara's lip lifted, just enough to show teeth. Ethan rested a hand against her neck, feeling the tremor beneath her thick fur. "It's all right," he murmured, though his own pulse had begun to climb. Daniel straightened and removed his gloves, tucking them away. "Here's how this works," he said. "You have 72 hours to provide proof these discoveries are domestic dogs and not hybrids. If you can't, protocol requires evaluation. That means a team comes in." "And if they decide wrong?" Ethan asked. Daniels met his gaze. "Then the dogs are removed." The word removed echoed like a door slamming shut. Daniels softened his tone. "I don't enjoy this," he said. "I've seen good people get caught between rules and reality, but I don't write the rules." When he left, the house seemed to exhale all at once. Ethan closed the door, leaned against it, and dragged a hand down his face. He could still feel the collar in his pocket, cold and accusatory. It happened fast. A sudden movement. A sharp sound as the latch on the back door rattled. Mara spun, lowered her head, and drove her shoulder into the door. Wood creaked. The latch gave. Cold air rushed in. Before Ethan could reach them, Mara herded the puppies through the opening, her body a dark wave pushing 5 smaller shapes ahead of her. "Mara!" Ethan shouted, lunging forward. Too late. They vanished into the trees, paws kicking up a burst of white that settled almost immediately, erasing direction. The forest swallowed them whole. Ethan stood there, breath tearing at his chest, staring into the blankness they'd left behind. The house felt suddenly enormous and empty, warmth pooling uselessly around a hearth that no longer guarded anything alive. Outside, the sky stayed bright and indifferent. Inside, time cracked open, and Ethan knew the next hours would decide everything. Ethan did not hesitate. He pulled the hood of his Navy working uniform tight against the wind, clipped a flashlight to his chest strap, and slung a coil of rope across his shoulder. The forest beyond the house waited in hard daylight, snow glittering like crushed glass, deceptively calm. He stepped into it at a jog, breath steady, eyes down. There they were, 6 sets of tracks cutting a frantic line away from the yard, 1 large print, deep and decisive, and 5 smaller ones, scattered and uneven, already softening as fresh snow tried to erase them. He followed without thinking, the way muscle memory takes over when the mind would otherwise freeze. The wind rose as he moved deeper, funneling through the trees with a low, angry moan. Pines crowded closer here, their trunks dark, bark split and scarred, branches bowed under ice. Ethan adjusted his pace, conserving energy, reading the ground. The small prints faltered and regrouped again and again, the larger ones circling back to herd. Them forward. Mara was leading them uphill, away from roads, away from people, toward trouble. He began to notice things that did not belong. A metal hook half buried beside a fallen log, its edge sharp and new against old wood. A length of wire glinting beneath powder, pulled taut across a narrow game trail. Further on, the snow showed a drag mark, a shallow groove as if something heavy had been pulled or had slid unwillingly. Someone had been here before them. Recently. The sense of being guided, no, driven, settled into Ethan's chest. He slowed, listening. The forest had gone quiet in the way it does when animals are afraid. Then he heard it. A sound so small it could have been the wind slipping through needles. But it wasn't. A whimper. Broken. Weak. Human training fell away and something older took over. He broke into a run. The ground fell sharply ahead, opening into a ravine that cut through the forest like a wound. Its walls were steep, crusted with ice. The bottom, shadowed even at midday. Ethan dropped to a knee at the edge and scanned downward. There, halfway down the slope, Mara lay angled against the frozen wall, body curved protectively around the puppies. One of them kicked weakly, leg caught fast in a wire snare anchored to a buried stake. Blood darkened the snow beneath it. Mara's chest heaved, her breath came shallow and fast. When she lifted her head and saw Ethan, her ears flicked and she tried to stand, only to collapse back, muscles shaking. "Easy," he said, voice carrying down to them. "I've got you." He assessed quickly. The slope was too steep for a straight descent. The snow crust would give way under weight. He anchored the rope around a thick pine, tested the knot twice, then slid the line over the edge. His shoulder twinged, an old injury that flared in cold, but he ignored it. He'd climbed worse in worse conditions. He controlled his breathing, planted his boots, and lowered himself, inch by inch, letting the rope bite into his gloves. Halfway down, the crust broke. He slipped, rope snapping taut, pain flaring bright and hot along his left shoulder. He grunted and held on. Below, one of the puppies cried, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the wind. Ethan forced himself to continue, muscles burning, until his boots hit the bottom. Up close, the damage was clearer. The snare had cinched around the puppy's ankle, wire biting into flesh. The pup shook uncontrollably, eyes dull. Ethan knelt, blocking the wind with his body, and spoke softly as he worked. He slid his knife free, careful not to jostle the leg, and cut the wire clean. The tension released with a sharp snap. He wrapped the small body in his jacket, pressing it against his chest, feeling the fragile heartbeat flutter there. Mara watched him, eyes glassy but focused. He reached for her next, sliding one arm beneath her chest, testing her weight. She tried to rise again, failed, and sagged into him. He repositioned, keeping her steady, when light swept across the ravine wall above them. A flashlight beam, bright, deliberate. Ethan looked up. At the edge stood a man, silhouette sharp against the snow-bright sky. He was tall and lean, wrapped in a dark parka with the hood pushed back, exposing a narrow face and a shaved jaw shadowed by stubble. His hair was cropped close, military neatness without insignia. He moved with the predator's economy, no wasted motion, boots planted wide for balance. The flashlight in his hand did not shake. "Put the dog down," the man called, voice flat, practiced, carrying easily over the wind. Ethan felt the moment stretch. The voice was wrong for law enforcement. No announcement, no authority tag, no radio crackle, just command. He adjusted his grip on Mara, angling his body protectively over the puppies. "Back away," Ethan said, keeping his tone level. "This isn't yours." The man's mouth twitched into something like a smile. "That's where you're wrong." He stepped closer to the edge, beam narrowing, pinning them in white light. In his other hand, he held a compact device, dark, cylindrical, with a short barrel. Not a firearm, a tranquilizer launcher. Ethan recognized it instantly. Mara growled low in her throat, a sound born of pain and fury. The puppies pressed closer together. Snow hissed down the ravine walls as the wind surged. "Leave," Ethan said. "Now." The man tilted his head, studying Ethan the way hunters study terrain. "You don't know what you're carrying," he replied. "That dog is property." Ethan's jaw set. He shifted his stance, calculating distance, angles, the climb back up with a wounded animal and a bundle of lives. Above them, the man adjusted his grip, finger resting along the launcher. Then, faint but unmistakable, came another sound from the forest, a second set of footsteps, fast and heavy, breaking through brush. The man's head snapped toward it, irritation flashing. Across his face, Ethan didn't look away. He tightened his hold on Mara and the puppy against his chest, readying himself for whatever came next as the beam above wavered. The man at the edge of the ravine stepped closer, boots crunching the crusted snow with deliberate care. Up close, he looked older than Ethan had first thought, late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a face cut hard by weather and impatience. His cheekbones jutted sharp beneath leathery skin browned by years outdoors, and a narrow scar ran from the corner of his mouth toward his jaw, tugging his expression into a permanent half-sneer. Stubble shadowed his chin, uneven and gray-flecked, the kind that came from not caring enough to shave rather than choosing not to. His eyes were pale, restless, the color of river ice, always moving. The parka he wore was utilitarian, patched and stained, and the tranquilizer launcher in his hand rested easy against his forearm, like an extension of his will. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, voice low and almost conversational. "That dog belongs to a line that pays. She wandered. Happens." Ethan shifted his stance, angling his body to shield the puppies clustered behind his legs. He kept his breathing slow, his tone measured. Years ago, in places far hotter than this ravine, he had learned how fear fed on haste. "You're mistaken," he said. "She's injured. Her pups are dying. Walk away." The man chuckled softly. "You don't get it. She's tagged, not with a chip you'd find at a vet, with people who notice when property disappears." He tilted the launcher a fraction higher. "Put her down. I'll take her. You keep the pups. That's the bargain." Mara growled, a deep feral sound pulled up from pain and fury. She shifted, weight trembling on 3 good legs, eyes never leaving the man. The puppies pressed closer, their small bodies shuddering as the wind pushed through the ravine like a blade. Snow sifted down the walls, whispering. Ethan spoke without raising his voice. "Step back." The man's smile thinned. He lunged. Time fractured into clean, sharp pieces, the tetsumata. Launcher came up, finger tightening. At the same instant, Mara surged forward, teeth clamping onto a length of old wire half buried in the snow. With a sound like a snapped bone, the rusted snare gave way. The sudden release threw her sideways, but it also bought a heartbeat, just enough. Ethan moved. He scooped 2 puppies into his jacket, tucking them tight against his chest, and pivoted toward the slope. Behind him, the remaining 3 lost footing as the snow shifted, rolling toward the ravine's lip. Ethan dropped to one knee, caught one by the scruff, then another, shoving them toward the narrow ledge where they could cling. The third slid farther, yelping, before a gloved hand caught its hind leg. A shot cracked, not loud like a firearm, but sharp. The dart buried itself in the snow inches from Ethan's shoulder. "Enough!" the man barked, scrambling to reposition. A new voice cut through the chaos. "Step away from him!" Officer Daniel Daniels emerged from the tull. Trees above, breath steaming, boots sure. He looked different without the measured distance of protocol, jacket unzipped, jaw set, eyes burning with intent. He held his service weapon low but ready, stance wide and grounded, the posture of someone who knew exactly how quickly things could turn fatal. He had followed the tracks from the house, read the signs Ethan had read, and then some. The poacher froze, eyes flicking between them. "You're late," he sneered. Daniels advanced 1 step. "Drop it." For a long second, the wind was the only sound. Then the man laughed, short and bitter. He let the launcher fall into the snow. Daniels closed the distance fast, cuffing him with practiced efficiency, radio already crackling as he called for backup and rescue. He glanced down at Ethan, taking in the scene, the rope anchored above, the blood on the snow, the puppies shaking in a man's jacket. "You okay?" Daniels asked, voice softer now. Ethan nodded once. "They need heat. Now." Together they worked to get everyone up. Daniels anchored another line and hauled while Ethan pushed from below, pain flaring through his shoulder with every movement. At the top, they collapsed into the snow, chests heaving. Mara lay on her side, breath ragged but steadying, her head resting briefly against Ethan's knee as if confirming he was still there. As Daniels secured the poacher, a folded paper slipped from the man's pocket and fluttered into the snow. Ethan picked it up. Coordinates, rough but clear, a warehouse address near the harbor, near his house. The poacher saw it and smiled through blood at his lip. "You think this ends with me?" he said. "We don't work alone." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Snow kept falling. Ethan closed his fist around the paper, eyes hard, already knowing the next fight would come closer to home than he liked. Winter loosened its grip the way it always did along Lake Superior, reluctantly, with one last show of brilliance before surrender. The snow thinned to a clean white sheen that reflected the sky, and the harbor woke beneath a brighter sun. Ethan stood at the window as morning settled in, the house breathing differently now, fuller, warmer, alive. Outside, the yard no longer felt like a boundary to fear, but a threshold to work yet to be done. Daniel Daniels kept his word. The revised report arrived quietly, without ceremony or headlines. It stated what Ethan had always known. Mara and her 5 puppies were domestic German shepherds, abandoned and rescued during a storm. The language was plain, precise, and merciful. Daniels delivered it himself, standing in the kitchen with his cap tucked under his arm, shoulders eased of the rigid tension Ethan had first seen in him. Up close, Daniels looked older than his years, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes deepened by long winters and longer days enforcing rules that rarely bent. He spoke with an honesty that had been worn smooth by experience. "I adjusted what needed adjusting," he said. "Sometimes the letter of the law needs help finding its spirit." Helen Carter handled the rest with a competence born of patience. She arrived with a folder thickened by forms, her handwriting neat and unwavering despite the tremor of age. Vaccinations were scheduled, registrations were filed, microchips were placed. She moved through the process like someone who had waited years for a chance to do one thing exactly right. Her appearance softened as spring crept in, wool coats replaced by cardigans, silver hair freed from its cap and braided loosely down her back. She carried herself with the steadiness of a woman who had learned that care was not loud but constant. Ethan made a decision that surprised even him. The rental house had always been temporary, a place to keep the cold out and the past at bay. Now it became something else. He walked the perimeter of the land, measuring distances with an old soldier's eye, sketching plans on scrap paper at the table. Fencing went up where the snow had thinned. Kennels followed, built sturdy and simple, with room for movement and light. A hand-painted sign took shape above the porch, letters carved carefully and filled with blue that matched the lake on a clear day. Silver Harbor Haven. Beneath it, a small paw print etched into the wood, humble and unmistakable. Mara healed slowly but thoroughly. The scar on her shoulder faded to a pale line beneath regrown fur, still visible if you knew where to look. A reminder rather than a wound. She moved with a new authority, no longer frantic or hunted, her dark sable coat gleaming under the sun without shine or artifice, black overlay along her back catching light in soft contrast. She watched everything. When the puppies stumbled into moments of fear, an unexpected noise, a stranger's voice, Mara stepped in, positioning herself close, breathing steady, teaching them that calm could be learned. The puppies grew fast. Buddy's chest broadened first, Daisy's paws stayed a shade lighter. Charlie discovered the joy of chasing shadows. Molly learned patience by watching Helen's hands. And Max, once the weakest, found his strength in persistence, his wheeze fading into memory. Daniels visited often, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes with supplies, sometimes with nothing but time. Without his uniform jacket, he looked less like an authority and more like a man choosing where he belonged. He spoke little about the poacher, only enough to say the ring had been disrupted and would not be returning to this stretch of shoreline. When he watched Ethan work, his expression softened into something close to respect. The seasons turned with a generosity that felt earned. Snow retreated to the shaded edges and sunlight painted the water in bands of silver and blue. Mornings arrived early and clear. On one such morning, the yard filled with motion. 5 young dogs ran in wide, clumsy circles, their paws thudding a rhythm against the earth. Ethan stood in the center, coffee steaming in his hands, the Navy working uniform still his daily skin, but worn now with ease, rather than armor. Mara approached him, rested her head against his knee, and looked up. He laughed, a sound that startled him with its honesty, and scratched behind her ears. The puppies skidded to a stop and rushed back, tails wagging, the world finally simple. Helen watched from the porch, sunlight warming her face, satisfaction settling quietly in her chest. Daniels leaned against the fence, cap tipped back, the corners of his mouth lifted. Ethan looked around at the fence lines, the kennels, the dogs, and felt the last weight of winter lift. He smiled, Not the guarded curve he'd practiced alone, but the open one that meant he had arrived. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they come quietly, through a freezing night, a wounded dog, or a single choice to stop when the world tells you to keep going. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people with tired hearts, through mercy instead of strength, through compassion instead of fear. When Ethan opened his door, he didn't just save a dog family, he answered a calling. And in doing so, God used that moment to heal more than one broken life. In our own lives, we may not face blizzards or ravines, but we all face moments where love asks us to act, to care, to stay, to believe that no soul is forgotten, human or animal. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, protect you, and keep you warm. And may He remind you every day that even the smallest act of kindness can become a miracle.